Okay then folks, welcome back to the last part of our Fianna Fáil discussion, and this time we're just going to tie up a few loose ends here. The main focus of Fianna Fáil would always be on agricultural policy, industrial policy, the economic war, in other words the economy and society, which we looked at, and of course in the first video we also looked at Anglo-Irish policy, and that would be the whole area of De Valera's dismantling of the treaty. However, there might be a few other areas that might be worth looking at, and if you look at the 2018 exam question about security and the state between 1923 and 1945, you certainly would want to have a look at action here, specifically the whole area of the IRA and the Blueshirts. Okay, so Fianna Fáil, I suppose, traditionally had been linked to the IRA. If you go back in the family tree from Sinn Féin to the anti-treaty Sinn Féin to before that, there was a strong Republican link in the party. And indeed, Fianna Fáil, when it was established, its full title was called Fianna Fáil, the Republican Party. And I suppose many IRA prisoners during the Cumann na Gael period felt that when De Valera would come in, he would release them. And of course, in 1932, the IRA began to drill and recruit men as well. And they came into a lot of conflict with the Army Comrades Association, otherwise known as the. So this was proving to become a bit of a problem for Fianna Fáil and De Valera. De Valera was in a kind of a difficult situation between dealing with some of his old comrades from going back as far as 1916 into the War of Independence, into the Civil War, and now he's going to have to deal with this threat. So, in an attempt to try and, I suppose, fob off the IRA threat, he introduced the new Military Pensions Act, and this would basically give all members of the IRA who had served during the War of Independence and beforehand a pension in the attempt, I suppose, to try and, give them some kind of thing to be happy about within the new Fianna Fáil run state. However, there was continued actions between the IRA and the Blueshirts, and in 1935-36, the IRA were also engaged in more incidents as well, acts of, I suppose, violence and also robberies, etc. So De Valera had to resist IRA threat. So in 1920 or 1936, the IRA was declared an illegal organisation. And at the time, the IRA had proposed a march to Bodenstown, which was a commemoration that happened every year on the 23rd of June, and De Valera bans this march. The IRA Chief of Staff, Maurice Toomey, was also sentenced to 3 years in prison. Another area worth mentioning as well, again, if it came up in a question on the strengths and weaknesses of De Valera, you could perhaps put it down as a strength and how he dealt with the blue shirt threat. Also, the whole area of security, again, it's a paragraph on that. And that would be the whole area of the blue shirts. The Army Comrades Association, as they were first called, later renamed as the National Guard. These were essentially ex-army officers from the Free State Army, etc., who had been laid off during the period of the Army Mutiny and essentially formed, I suppose, another paramilitary organisation within Ireland itself. This was Ireland's brief flirtation with fascism as well, and there was clashes between the Army Comrades Association and the IRA around the time that De Valera and Fianna office in 1932. The Blue Shirts were led by a fantasist called Ono Duffy, a former Garda Commissioner, and he had become the leader of this, and he gave it a more militaristic, kind of quasi-fascist name called the National Guard, and they adopted a blue shirt and black beret uniform. Again, I suppose, harking to, the black shirts in Italy, the brown shirts in Germany, as fascism was certainly gaining traction across a lot of Europe. O'Duffy sees himself in the same light as a Mussolini or indeed a Franco. There you can see O'Duffy addressing a small crowd at one of his so-called rallies around this particular. On the 10th of July 1933, a march is planned to Dublin, and some perhaps saw this as a kind of an attempt, a kind of a coup d'etat somewhat, to try and take over control of the country. That's certainly disputable whether they had the means to do that or not, but they probably didn't. But De Valera wasn't taking any chances, and he introduced a Public Safety Act to effectively ban the march on Dublin. This then was pretty much a done deal when O'Duffy opted to accept the order and cancel the march, and was seen as a clear victory for both De Valera and the government in dealing with the so-called blue shirt. I suppose then, following on from that, Cumann na Gael is renamed Fine Gael, and indeed Ono Duffy is the first leader of Fine Gael, and he led them into a disastrous local election campaign in 1934 and was subsequently booted out as leader from the party itself. The blue shirt then from 35 to 36 becomes a bit of a laughing stock, really. The last episode for them was a small amount heading off to the Spanish Civil War to fight on behalf of the fascists. with the war there against the communist forces. But that was pretty much the end of O'Duffy and the Blueshirts after that. And I think he died soon afterwards, and thus too did the Blueshirt threat. Okay, just a final kind of footnote to all this stuff. This, again, probably would only be relevant to a question on Fianna Fáil in the 30s in general. Probably not the most important aspect of all the discussions we've had in these 4 videos, but foreign policy, Fianna Fáil, and indeed De Valera specifically played quite a prominent role in the League of Nations, which was set up after World War I. In 1932, he became chairman of the General Assembly. And he also was appointed president of the council as well, and acted as president of the assembly. And here he often spoke up about the failings of the League of Nations in dealing with the emerging fascist threat in Europe in itself. And that brings us then finally to the exam questions. And as you can see here, some of the past questions. There was a question there in 2019, by the way, on Anglo-Irish relations. In 2017, and the first video, sorry, 2018 in part 1, I also discussed the whole area of security and the threats to the state. Again, we also looked in 2017, the question on Anglo-Irish relations, who achieved more, Cosgrave or De Valera? And if you've watched the Cumann na Gael Cosgrave videos and the De Valera videos in Fianna Fáil I've done over the last week or so, you will see that, I suppose, De Valera is far more vigorous in his attempt to dismantle the treaty, but you would have to bring in Cosgrave again, things like the Boundary Commission, Dominion status, and then you could bring in things as well like the economic war and the wider dismantling of the treaty as well, up until the Anglo-Irish Agreement, really, I think about 1938, with the onset of war in 1939. Now, sometimes that question, you actually have the question here in front of me. The only difference being there, you'd have to mention as well about involvement with the British during World War II, the relationship with Churchill, and concluding with the Republic of Ireland Act of 2018. Then, as you can see, this question on security, we've mentioned this already in part 1 of this video, and it's a very good question. Only ever came up once, but you would have to have things like the post-Civil War situation, law and order with Cumann na Gael, the establishment of the Gardaí, the army mutiny threat, then going into things that we've just mentioned, such as the IRA threat, the Blueshirts, and then I suppose Ireland's defensive position in World War II, because it goes up as far as 1945. 2016 then, as we've just discussed, the whole area of the economy and society in the previous video in part 3. Okay, again, you would have to involve into both Cumann na Gael and Fianna Fáil, going into a paragraph as well on the war economy. That's the whole Sean Lemass rationings, Department of Supplies, etc. And I'll be looking at that in a World War II video coming up very, very soon. 2015 and 14, we've no questions on the Fianna Fáil government, because that year the documents question was on the pursuit of sovereignty. So 2013, again, you can see a question on the Irish economy from 22 to 39, and also a second question, 2 questions out of the 4 questions that year. There was a question on the Anglo-Irish relations under De Valera. Now, this is quite maybe a bit of a more challenging question, because it's specifically on the De Valera Fianna Fáil into World War II period. I suppose I'd come in there with the first paragraph about De Valera's aims, and then I would try to give a paragraph on the Oath of Allegiance, the Governor-General, the Privy Council and Senate, the External Relations Act, going into the economic war, the Anglo-Irish relations, or the Anglo-Irish Agreement of 1938, and then, of course, the relationship with Churchill during World War II. So if you kind of stop off along the way, you'd have a very good, solid essay there. And that's certainly one that I wouldn't rule out, perhaps maybe coming up again, maybe this year. 2012, the old chestnut on Anglo-Irish relations is there again. Okay, and that's always a very, very popular question, well answered by most students. And then we go back to 2011, the strengths and weaknesses of De Valera as a political leader. And in part 1, I discussed there's no time frame on that question as such. So you could go from the 32 to 39 period, or 32 to 45, or indeed you could go right back to 1916 and then into the whole area of the rebirth of Sinn Féin, into the treaty negotiations and what followed after that, and then go into the 1930s. Okay, again, we've Anglo-Irish relations in 2010, and indeed in 2009, which did De Valera manage better, the economy or Anglo-Irish relations? Argue your case referring to both, and be conscious of the time frame there as well, from 32 to 45. So you'd have to bring in some study as well of the war economy and indeed relations with Churchill and Britain during World War II. The consolidation of democracy question I looked at in part 1 as well, and I also looked at the Anglo-Irish relations question numerous times. So that's pretty much it, folks, on the whole area of Fianna Fáil in the 32 to 39 period. I looked at these over the last 4 videos, and in the next section I'm going to look at Ireland during World War II, both North and South. And in the North we'll cover the case study on Belfast during World War II. So stay tuned and thanks for watching.